Work has begun to combat anti-money laundering and terrorist financing to ensure the BVI's financial system can pass international scrutiny during the fourth round of mutual evaluations in 2017 and beyond. On March 12, 2014, Cabinet approved an outline for the preparation of the territory's first National Risk Assessment Council, the NRAC, and appointed members of the NRAC headed by Premier Dr. D. Orlando Smith. Deputy Chair of the NRAC Steering Group, Glenford Malone, appeared on the July 1st JTV Spotlight program as part of a series of public awareness activities. Malone said, although much of the work to be done will be focused on financial activities, it is not restricted to the businesses in the financial services sector.
A national risk assessment is really the jurisdiction's tool is going to use to make sure that the economic viability of the jurisdiction remain intact. Effectively, what we're going to do, we're going to take a holistic view of the jurisdiction risk from a money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction financing. We're going to look at how the jurisdiction deals with these issues, what are the risks to the jurisdiction, from an economic perspective, from a legal perspective, and when that process is over, we're going to come up with a mechanism to mitigate these circumstances, so thereby continue to maintain our economic prospects here in the BVI. Because we're going to look at financial services, we're going to look at what we call dealers in precious metals, stones, high-value goods such as the yachting industry. We're going to look at real estate agents and lawyers, etc. So it's just not the financial services, even though it deals a lot of purely financial transactions and the like, but not solely from that industry. What it says is we're going to come in and we're going to ask you if you have policies, you have procedures set up. We're going to tell you, well, do you understand what the law says? Are you doing what the law says? And if you effectively say no, then that institution will be part of the wider community who may pose a risk. And we would say, then at the end of the assessment, we'll say to the government effectively, this is the risk these institutions pose. Here are the recommendations. This is what you need to do to minimize these risks.
Chairman of the NRAC Steering Group's Public Education Committee, Leon Wheatley, called for the business community to support the assessment process. He says the National Risk Assessment Survey will help the BVI to prove beyond legislation that it is effectively combating money laundering and terrorist financing.
This assessment is really for us to get to the point where we know where we are. And then once we get there, we can begin speaking to how we're going to improve and demonstrate our improvement leading up to this 2017 evaluation. So essentially, this risk assessment is all look in the mirror to assess where we stand. And that also brings on another point. The information that will be used in the risk assessment will be confidential, and it will be used specifically for the National Risk Assessment. And it's important that when people actually fill out the questionnaires that they're honest, open, and frank in their responses, because the risk assessment will only be as good as the information we get out of it. So there's no need to say, well, okay, you're a trust company with the Financial Services Commission. I don't know, they're going to use this against us down the road, or, So the whole thing is we need people to really be open, honest, and we need a good response rate.
Members of the National Risk Assessment Council of the Virgin Islands were introduced to the public on April 10, 2014, during a launch ceremony held at Maria's by the Sea. 14 representatives signed a memoranda of understanding on behalf of their respective intergovernmental organizations, affirming government's commitment to the compliance of international regulations governing anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. The National Risk Assessment Council stressed that information submitted by the public must be accurate in order to make correct recommendations to government and to strengthen the BVI's international relationships.
We live right now in a community where a lot of us are talking about the fact of strained resources. And if we carry out a risk assessment that doesn't get the right information for institution, you know what's going to happen? We're going to get the wrong recommendation to government. So we're going to say to government, do X, Y, and Z. They're going to take a limited amount of resources to do X, Y, and Z. and then that may be wrong. We've wasted resources. So that is why we want everyone to be truthful, honest, and they shouldn't worry about what the report would say in terms of our risk. The good thing about a risk assessment that it should tell you what the risks are, and you determine how to address those risks.
It's an opportunity for correction.
Exactly, it is.
For our international relationships, our financial international relationships, it is important in order for us to have those relationships strengthened.
Yes, because if we get a bad report, if we get a report in 2017, which will likely be finalized in 2018, what that would say is that the BVI is non-compliant. So we'll be on a high-risk jurisdiction. And, you know, without referring to any particular issue, we know what it is to be quote-unquote blacklisted. You don't want to get into that. It's easier to stay out of any blacklist than to get out when you're already there. It's much more difficult to get off than it is to stay out. So we have always stayed out from the money laundering perspective, and we want to continue that process.
Additional information and questionnaires can be found on the website bvinra.org. You can also send in your inquiries via that website. The entire Spotlight interview can be seen on our website jtvlive.net, as well as our JTV News YouTube channel. A link is also available on our Facebook page, JTV55.